Hey guys, it's Gary back again. Um, Forgive the blue tinge on my face. I need my light on so I can read some of the stuff. Um, Behind me, I have my tiki headlights. You can't tell they're tiki heads, um, but I will produce a photo that will prove the fact. I'm trying to build up my retro bachelor pad lounge credentials. Um, from the space age of the 1950s, of course. Um, I'll tell you, this has been a hard haul. First of all, I'm running out of space on my computer, which means I have to find stuff to delete, or else I can't do any more videos. Second of all, a couple days ago, 4 days ago now, I recorded a video, 55 minutes, uploaded it, and only then realized I screwed up, made the wrong microphone selection, so there was no audio whatsoever. Had to delete that. I know a bunch of people got notifications that I had put up a video, and I had to delete it right away because there was no audio. A couple days later, I re-recorded it yesterday. I can't recall yesterday. I think it was yesterday. It was 59 minutes, and got the copyright notification about the music that I was playing in the background by Dave Brubeck and blah, blah, blah. So I tried to mute that audio for the 2 or 3 minutes of the copyright infringement and then resubmit it for YouTube to upload again, but they won't have anything to do with it, apparently. So I got to do this again. I feel like I'm giving the same lecture 3 times over. So I was going to do this in 2 parts. I'll do Dave Brubeck and kind of a series of that will continue of how I got into one musician and how they lead into other musicians. I did that with the ECM stuff when I first got into ECM through Bar Phillips' 3-Day Moon album, and how all the artists that played in that album I then went and got solo albums by, etc., etc. So I'm going to do something similar with the Dave Brubeck family and associates. And I was going to do it in 2 parts. I think maybe now I'll do it in 3. I did everybody except Cal Tjader in part 1 originally, but that went on for about an hour. And because I like Cal Tjader and I have a bit more stuff by him than by Brubeck and Paul Desmond, I was going to do Cal Tjader separately. But since the first part took almost an hour, I think I might break it up into 3 sections. So, going to start with Dave. Let's see how it goes. And probably we'll do Paul Desmond in part 2, and some guys that spun off from him, and maybe Cal Tjader in part 3, because this is getting quite tiresome. Okay, so. And this time, as I have no music in the background, so there's no copyright infringement. However, I'm tempted to play a 55-minute version of Louie Louie on guitar and just see what happens. See if I get copyright infringement for that, which I should, but we'll see what happens. The LPs that I have to show of Dave Brubeck, the great pianist who died in, I should have had this all up, but I don't. Actually died in 2012. Long career. He died 1 day short of his 92nd birthday. But he played right up until the end. As a matter of fact, the last couple of years of his life, he had a pacemaker. He was playing gigs right up until the time before he had the operation to have his pacemaker implanted. And then right after he had the pacemaker implanted, went right back to playing live gigs again. The critics said it was amazing because he really seemed to have really lost none of his technical facilities into his late 80s and early 90s when he was still playing. This might be easier for you guys to take and maybe easier for me to do it in 3 sections. I don't have a lot of Dave Brubeck's stuff, really. And all the LPs I've shown before. But Dave was in college, in his college days, and he met a few musicians while in school. Cal Tjader is one of them, and a lot of people don't necessarily associate Cal Tjader and Dave Brubeck, simply because by the time they were known, they were all off on their own separate careers. But Back in his college days, Dave Brubeck formed an octet about 1946 and wrote music for them, but couldn't get a lot of work for the octet. And the octet didn't really last too long, even though he had written a bunch of music for it. Now, Cal Tjader, who became known as the vibraphone player, in the octet was the drummer. Paul Desmond, the alto saxophone player, was another associate of Dave Brubeck right from the beginning, right from the college days. And another guy, Bill Smith, a clarinet player, who was very important to Dave Brubeck's kind of establishment in his history. Now, Bill Smith is not as well known as Cal Tjader and Paul Desmond because, well, there's a couple of reasons. He went on to a long teaching career in Seattle, Washington for 30 years alone. He's also known under the name of, and by the way, he's still alive today, Bill Smith. He's also known as William Overton Smith. So his name and on his credits are read any number of different ways. And I want to say even on the Brubeck stuff, he's not necessarily, I think he's listed as W.M. O. Smith or something like that, sometimes referred to Bill Smith. But as William Overton Smith, he's also known, besides a long career as a teacher, and he's still around, as a composer of serious classical music. In his early jazz days, after his early association with Brubeck's octet, he also recorded a bit with jazz guys as a clarinetist, West Coast jazz guys, because all these guys were based out of California. 1957, William Overton Smith, Bill Smith, recorded with Shelly Manne, the famous West Coast drummer. I think most people would know, if you know 50s jazz, you probably, in the West Coast scene, you certainly would know Shelly Manne. He actually recorded an album in 57 with Shelly Manne. This sounds interesting. I have to pick it up because I don't have it. It's called Concerto for Clarinet and Combo. So the clarinet would be Bill Smith. And he, in 1959, 2 years later, he also recorded with one of my favorite guitarists, Barney Kessel, on an album called Carmen. William Overton Smith had a career maybe slightly more out of the jazz spotlight, but also, one of those important early associates with Dave Brubeck. And it's funny how these guys, especially Paul Desmond, right there at the beginning of the career. So the octet couldn't get work, and it was only in 1949 that they actually got the opportunity to record some of the music that I guess had been written earlier. And I don't really think the octet, by the time this was recorded in 1949, this is the original cover of the original jazz classics, which I love. I love that art. I'm such a sucker for art, anywhere from the 1930s. I specifically love 50s and 60s art, but when I see this, I love this style as well. So I guess that particular style probably goes all the way back to the 30s. So by the time they got to record as the octet in 49, I don't think the octet existed anymore, but music had been written for it. And I believe they reassembled, possibly, to record the music on this album from 1949. And since Brubeck couldn't get work with the octet, he pared it down and started appearing in clubs. Here's another one I've shown before. This is a great repackaging. I have to get this on CD, of a 2-album set of what Dave Brubeck went to in starting in 49 to 51, pared the octet down to a trio. And they were able to get work as a trio, piano, bass, and drums. Who was the drummer? Cal Tjader, who also started playing vibes. So he was playing vibes in this trio as well as drums. And a bass player named Ron Crotty, who stayed with Brubeck for a while because when Brubeck went on to establish his quartet, bringing Paul Desmond back, alto saxophone player Paul Desmond back in the quartet, Ron Crotty was originally the bass player of the Dave Brubeck quartet. So what this album gathered together, and I have shown this before, is 3, they called them mini LPs at the time. I love that art. And these were all, I believe these were all pretty much recorded back to back. So 3 mini LPs came out with this trio combination. 49 and 51 were when they were working. This is nice stuff. I mean, you can imagine it's a little crudely recorded, that you would expect for the time. This picture of Cal Jader, it doesn't even look like the Cal Jader we know. If I can get that on camera. Cal Jader on drums. And I love the liner notes, and I love these whole twofer things, And this is great. These were 10-inch mini LPs, 10-inch LPs. So I don't know how long they ran. I would have to do a summation of I'm guessing between 20 and 30 minutes each one, maybe. This is good stuff. I mean, if you're, obviously Brubeck recorded a lot. He recorded a lot in the quartet context. And that would really be, I guess, in a way, maybe a place to start. I don't know. But, if you want to hear Brubeck away from the quartet context, bass, drums, piano, and saxophone, and especially if you're a Cal Jader fan like me, this is real interesting, nice stuff. Most of the tunes are real short. Unfortunately, it'd be nice to hear these guys jam out. But it's nice, and already at this point, Cal Jader had picked up the vibes. So there's some tracks that don't have drums, that do have vibes, and also bongos. And I love bongos. I just love that sound. I love hand drums in general. I just love the way bongos propel the music. I always see bongos as kind of like the Western equivalent of the tabla drums. And I love tabla, the Indian tabla drums. Going on a little bit, and I've shown this, even though this was a twofer from the 70s, that's a real 60s art right there, and I love it. The art of Dave Brubeck, the fantasy years. This was the early establishing of the quartet. These are two 1953 albums. So, this is right after the trio. Dave decides to expand out, do a quartet. And so in 53, the quartet was already established and went for a lot of years. Let me see, what do we have here? We have Jazz at Oberlin, a live album. Was the first, originally, both of these were released as individual albums. The Jazz at Oberlin is disc 1 in this set and was recorded in March of 1953, a live album. Dave Brubeck on piano. Paul Desmond has now rejoined Dave on alto saxophone. Ron Crotty on bass, who was the bass player in the trio with Cal Jader. Cal Jader has now moved on, and I believe I don't think Cal Jader started his solo career yet. He might have been freelancing or he was supporting other people. So still a few years, I think, before he really started his solo career. Lloyd Davis was on drums for the Jazz at Oberlin disc, which was recorded in March 1953. The second disc on here is Jazz at College of the Pacific, recorded also in 1953 in December. The band was the same except for the drummer. Lloyd Davis is now gone, and Joe Dodge is now joined on drums. Apart from that, Ron Crotty was still the bass player, and you had Paul Desmond on alto sax, Dave Brubeck on piano, and this Jazz at College of Pacific, also another live album. Both of those were released separately. And I do have the OJC Original Jazz Classics CD reissue of Jazz at the College of Pacific from 1953 with the reinstated cover art, the original art, which I love, from 1953. Cartoonish thing. Now I'm guessing because it's OJC and the Original Jazz Classics always pretty much reverted back to the original album cover. So I'm pretty sure that's the original cover, and certainly it's 1950s style art there. So this was re-released on OJC. Pretty sure it's still in print. It runs less than 40 minutes. There was no extra tracks or anything when it was re-released on OJC. It's just really the original album as it came out as a single disc. And what else do I have? A slight departure. While the quartet was very active and going on, I'm not aware of a lot of Dave Brubeck solo piano CDs. Now, Dave recorded a whole lot. I'm not aware of that many solo piano CDs, but and I don't even know if this was planned actually. February 8th, 1957, though, Dave had a piano at his home, and somebody set up a recorder and right in Dave's home recorded a solo piano CD that they then released. It's called Dave Brubeck Plays and Plays and Plays, another original jazz classics. And this is from 57. So the quartet is rolling. The quartet's still actively going with Paul Desmond on alto sax. And there's Dave at home just playing solo piano. Nice. This is one of those, I mean, obviously Dave's recorded a lot. This is one of those recordings that I don't even know how it came to my attention. It was probably suggested to me, like on Amazon or something when you buy something by an artist. Or maybe even from my days in the RCA Record Club and the BMG Record Club, would occasionally have these things. And since they didn't have a big discography of any particular artist, sometimes if I could get it on sale, I'd just pick up whatever. So it's nice. It's Dave Brubeck playing, not improvising. These are all, pretty much standard tunes and not a whole lot different than you would expect from a group album. So it's not improvising, sadly. But it was nice that on the CD reissue, though, they did throw in an additional track, which Original Jazz Classics didn't do a lot of additional tracks. They pretty much released the albums as they were. But there's a 3.5 track additional track thrown in when this did get reissued on CD, which still only brings the running time to like 38 minutes. So it's a short disc. But one of the more obscure things, I think, in Dave's discography, obviously the most attention goes to the thing that he was known the most for, which is the quartet with Paul Desmond. And even after Paul Desmond, he still had a quartet using various musicians, including his sons. So I don't have a ton of things. And if you are interested in Dave Brubeck and you've heard some stuff that you like, but you don't have a lot of stuff, I wouldn't, if you've never heard him, I don't recommend going out and buying a box set. But if you've heard him and like him, here's a box set that came out in 1992. Now, obviously, Dave lived another 20 years after this. But the last 20 years, I don't think were any big shifts or changes. Obviously, like most musicians, early in their career, it's early in their career is when a lot of the formative things and stylistic changes and new inspirations come along. So even though Dave lived another 20 years after this was compiled, and the most recent material from here goes to 1991, this is such an excellent. This is out of print, but I checked recently. This originally came out as $45. I have the receipt in here. And I bought it in 92. I'm pretty sure I bought this, maybe 93. I'm pretty sure I bought this as a new release. And it's 4 CDs. It is out of print now. But I have to tell you, I was saddened, number one, that it's out of print. Maybe not surprised because it came out in 92. Okay. That's quite a few years ago now. However, there are sealed copies of this available for cheaper than I paid for it. Now, it was $45 when it came out. I got it on sale for $40. I have the receipt in the box. And when I saw that there are copies out there sealed for $30, and I don't like to necessarily quote prices and things like that because my intent here is to leave these videos up for people to discover things. And, if somebody's watching this 2 years after I recorded or whatever, those CDs are probably not going to be available anymore at that price. But I just got to tell you, I was so surprised to see so many copies available at the $30 price range, new and sealed, which is $10 less than I paid for it when it came out and it was new. And forget used, you could get it even cheaper used. And what you're getting is 4 CDs. I'm going to sound like an advertisement here, but this is such a great retrospective. 4 CDs is about 4.5 hours worth of music, more or less. Each CD is approximately 70 minutes. I generally don't like compilations of artists like this, but Dave has so much stuff that unless you're going to buy all the individual CDs, it's really tough. And here you get to sample so much. there's a brief snippet. This thing starts with a snippet of something that wasn't, I don't think it was even off a Dave Brubeck recording. It was an early piece recorded by the Octet that runs under a minute. And it was recorded in 46 when the actual Octet recording album, by the time they got to record their own album, was actually recorded in 49. But there was this one little piece that was included on an album that I'm pretty sure was not a Dave Brubeck album. It was called, on the Fantasy label, it's called Old Sounds from San Francisco. I think what it was a multi-artist compilation album of bands that were probably not very well known. Remember, this is in the 1940s. And they had this Dave Brubeck Octet track on there, on that album. I'm pretty sure that was not a Dave Brubeck album. And quite an interesting little piece. It swings like a traditional swing piece that you would expect from the 40s, but it has this undercurrent of classical music in there, all in less than a minute. Quite an interesting little piece. And the musicians on it already are Paul Desmond on alto sax, Dave Van Kruyt, tenor saxophone, Bill Smith, clarinet, who I mentioned before, Dick Collins, trumpet, Bob Collins, trombone, Cal Jader, drums, a couple other guys. So that's from 46, and then it jumps into, let me see, is there any, I think that might be the only thing from the Octet there. Right after that, this goes into the trio music that I showed you with Ron Crotty and Cal Jader, some sampling of that stuff. Yeah, then they do the Octet as well. So you get little samplings of those early records that I showed you before the formation of the quartet. And here's this. I always say, I love 50s and 60s art, but here's a poster from the 40s. Poster for Dave Brubeck concert from 1941, and I love that art too. So I guess I'm really a fan of the pop art kind of from the 30s on. I love that whole style. Fantastic book that comes with it too. And it seems that the edition, sometimes they update these editions, but it seems that the edition that I see out there that was available for a lot of years is still the same box that I showed, and it still has this fantastic historical booklet. Each track has a breakdown of not only the musicians, and I'm not going to be able to read this, not only the musicians and the recording dates and the original albums that came from, but also some historical data. Hell of a job. Somebody put a lot of work into this set. And honestly, I paid $40 for it. It's well worth that, what I paid for it. Just a lot of early photos. A lot of photos of Paul Desmond, who was probably, the most famous musician that played with Dave for a long time. And interesting photo. Here's a photo, 1955, of Woody Herman, Ella Fitzgerald, a very young Dave Brubeck, and a very young Johnny Mathis. There's Woody Herman, Ella Fitzgerald, Dave in the white suit, and a very young Johnny Mathis. Still looks like Johnny Mathis, though. My mom loved Johnny Mathis, so I know what he looks like, and I know what he sounds like. So this goes on, starts in 46, covers a ton of stuff from his quartet years with Paul Desmond and the bass players that came and went in the quartet, the drummers that came and went in the quartet too. Eugene Wright and Joe Morello probably were the bass player and drummer known the best because they were on the Time Out album, which had Take 5. Take 5, the big hit single. And Take 5 and the Time Out album was probably one of those albums that people had that didn't necessarily even like jazz. That's how popular they got for the Take 5 single, which, by the way, Take 5 was written by Paul Desmond, the alto saxophone player, which I didn't know for years, and probably, if you know the track, you probably know it. But this booklet is just fantastic reading. There's a lot of material, here from the 50s and from the quartet years. This Dave at the piano, like falling asleep. This is such a fantastic. Like I said, I'm not a fan of compilations. To me, they always leave off the tracks that I would include. But if you take a look at Dave's discography and the number of years he recorded, pretty much nonstop from 1949 till his passing in 2012. That's a lot. There's a lot of albums to get. I don't even think there was any gaps where he stopped recording for any substantial periods because he never stopped playing live. So this goes on to sample just a lot of albums, and on the 50s, on the 60s, definitely past the famous quartet with Paul Desmond, but he had other quartets. Here's a quartet that he had in 1968 with Dave Brubeck, Jerry Mulligan on baritone saxophone, Jack Six on upright bass, and Alan Dawson on drums. That's an interesting combo. Jerry Mulligan obviously was very well established in his career at that point. So there's a lot of stuff. What can I say? The last track on here, which was recorded in May of 1991 on the 4-CD set, is a duo track of Dave on piano and Bill Smith again coming back on clarinet. So they start all the way back in those octet years, 1946, 1949, with Bill Smith on clarinet, and they end, the very last track is a duet with Dave's old friend Bill Smith on clarinet and Dave on piano from a 1991 album. So it's a nice kind of full circle thing. Prior to that, there's all kinds of different permeations of Dave's bands that went through the years, including his sons playing with them. Chris Brubeck, who plays electric bass. He also plays, I think, bass trombone. I didn't even know bass trombones existed, but I see it listed as bass trombone. And I can recall back when you had the Newport Jazz Festival, which used to change names every few years depending on who the sponsor was, but essentially it was the Newport Jazz Festival. PBS used to record the shows of the Newport Jazz Festival, outdoor festivals in the summertime, and they would then edit them down to 1-hour shows and play 3 or 4 or 5 of them 1-hour shows and sprinkle them, through their schedule just at various times through the year. Starting however long it took to edit them, like 6 months or 8 months after the actual concerts. They would film them, decide who to include, who not to include, and then obviously none of these were complete sets. They would play a couple, tracks from each group, depending on how popular they were. Maybe if they weren't known at all, you might get one live performance, one track. But I look forward to that every year. And PBS did that for a lot of years. Now it seems like they've stopped. And I want to say they probably stopped now, maybe 10 years ago, and I didn't even realize it. Because you didn't know when they were going to broadcast them. It was not in the summertime when the shows were going on. It would be a number of months later. But because you couldn't specify that they usually came on in September or October or whenever, you never really looked for them. You just kind of stumbled across them. And then once you saw 1 hour, you knew that there was a few other shows compiled. And it seems like, sadly, they have stopped doing that in recent years. But I saw a lot of bands then. And I want to say I saw Dave Brubeck on more than one occasion, because I can remember this drummer he had playing with him, Randy Jones on drums, who's a young guy, playing with him in the, I want to say, the late 80s, probably early 90s. And I remember seeing his son, Chris Brubeck, playing electric bass, and it was quite a sound a little odd, maybe, because if you know Dave Brubeck, you always associate the upright bass and pretty much an acoustic ensemble with him. So it was weird seeing his son playing electric bass and bass trombone. I remember he actually seeing his son play bass trombone, Chris Brubeck, and I want to say his son. Dan, I think it's Dan Brubeck, is a drummer. Yeah, Dan Brubeck also plays drums. He's played with Dave as well. And he played in the 70s with Dave, and probably off and on. But it's not all quartet stuff, which, for 4 CDs would be kind of samey sounding. This is such a, if you've heard Dave at all, maybe you have the Time Out album with Take Five on or something like that. If you really like it, man, you can't go wrong with this compilation. I tell you, the prices that the remaining things are going for, that the remaining discs are going for, it's incredible. I'll tell you, if I had a job right now, I would snatch up, at least for the prices they're going for, at least 3 sealed copies and just let them sit on the shelf. That's how strongly I feel about them. Absolutely fantastic. And by the way, 59 tracks. I always cut this stuff out and save it. Lux4DC said, the songs were selected by Dave, which is kind of cool. Maybe that's one of the things that gives it more credence with me than your standard compilation that's selected by who knows. Sometimes these compilations aren't even selected by people familiar with the music. But the fact that Dave picked out the tracks himself kind of makes it a big deal. So that thing ends in 91, and Dave obviously recorded beyond there. And I actually picked up a more recent CD. Well, this was actually recorded in 91, so it's pretty much at the end of that set. But the nice thing with the later day things is obviously they're recorded with today's technology. And you see the characters from Charlie Brown Peanuts on there. Apparently in 1988, there was a Charlie Brown primetime cartoon television special being made, and they approached Dave Brubeck to write the music for it. So Dave Brubeck decided, he went in, and now the music on here is actually recorded over a bunch of years, so I don't know exactly when the cartoon came out. But Dave started writing the music in 1988. Now this CD contains tracks from 3 different sessions, including the music written for the Charlie Brown thing. But the 3 different sessions, by the way, he even does a version of Linus and Lucy, the very famous Vince Guaraldi track, probably the best known theme from the Charlie Brown things, actually played by Vince Guaraldi, the composer on the original 1960s era Charlie Brown specials, but there's a version of it here. It's quite interesting. And there are 3 different sessions here, so I'm not actually sure when the cartoon came out. There are sessions where the music was recorded in September of 1988. There's also a session from December 1989 and May 1991. So I'm not sure if that later stuff from 91 was actually, maybe that was stuff that was just added to the CD to round out the playing time a bit more, or whether indeed it took that long for the cartoon to be finished. I'm not sure. But so Dave is, the interesting thing with this is Dave was approached to do the music, said, yeah, I'll do the music, and wrote the music as it fit. When they do soundtrack music, you need maybe a minute here, 55 seconds there. It doesn't make for much of a soundtrack listening experience. But what Dave did is right after he would record these themes that he wrote for the section of the cartoon that they were needed for, he would record that and then take that composition and make it a whole jazz tune. So it doesn't sound like a little soundtrack album like, 55 seconds here, a minute there, a minute, 10 minutes there. He actually recorded right after the theme was recorded for the way you see it in the cartoon. He recorded full-length song versions of these with the band, with people taking solos and things like that. And that's the music that you hear here. Very well recorded. Couple different permeations of this band. It's not just a straight trio, quartet, or anything. There's, let me see, a guy named Bobby Miltonello who plays flute and saxophones, Jack Six, an upright bass player, and Randy Jones on drums on some of the tracks. Other tracks becomes a family thing, with Dan Brubeck playing drums, Chris Brubeck playing electric bass, and Matthew Brubeck, his son, another son, playing cello. Those are nice tracks. It's nice, interesting colors there. So you have basically a couple different bands playing there, different instrumental mixes with the cello on some tracks and the flute and saxophone on the others, and two different rhythm sections. A couple tracks of just, looks like there's one that's just piano and cello, Matthew Brubeck on cello. It's a really, really nice album. It doesn't sound at all like, doesn't really sound like the Quartet stuff from the Paul Desmond days anymore at this point. But it's not avant-garde. It's not hard to get into. But if somebody just played it, you probably wouldn't pick out that it's Dave Brubeck. I really love this album. This is a good album. I got to get more stuff from this era. And like I said, just a nice, he's got two different bands, slightly different instrumentation in them, electric bass in one, upright bass in the other, flute and saxophone in one group, cello in another. So there's a nice variation there, and it's a fantastic album recorded 3 different sessions, 88, 89, and 91. And I don't even know how I selected this album. I bought it at Tower Records. I got the Tower sticker on there. Music Masters. I want to say I'm pretty sure this is either in print, and if it's not in print, there's probably copies swimming all over the place because I remember seeing this for years in the racks. Very good album. Very good late period album. I have to really get into and take a look at more of Dave Brubeck's late period albums, especially, because the recording techniques are a lot better, obviously, the later you get. And it's nice to hear a fuller sounding piano than the, slightly thinner in the 50s sound. So part of the theme of this, besides showing Dave Brubeck records, is how one artist leads you to buy another. And I am going to, go on and do Paul Desmond and musicians that I got into as a result of being into Paul Desmond, who I got into as a result of being into Dave Brubeck, and Cal Tjader also. But I have here a couple things that are interesting. I don't think I necessarily bought these because they were Dave Brubeck's sons, but it certainly piqued my curiosity. Here's an album by none other than Matthew Brubeck, the cello player, and somebody that I'm not familiar with, named Dave Whitelock, who's a guitarist. Interesting album because it's just a duet album of just guitar and cello. There's no rhythm section, there's no bass, there's no drums, no piano. Just Matthew Brubeck on a cello and Dave Whitelock on electric and acoustic guitars. This is recorded in 1990 on Jazz Point Records. I don't know anything about Jazz Point. It's out of Germany. I love that combination, without having a rhythm section or heavy drums there or anything like that. It's not real quiet. It bops along a little bit and everything, but it's nice when you don't want to hear something with a particularly heavy rhythm. And I actually bought it not so much because of Matthew Brubeck, but because I like that combination of guitars and cellos. You don't see that a whole hell of a lot. And here's another thing on DMP Records. Now, if you're a jazz fan in the 80s, you probably remember DMP Records, who I think are gone now. But man, it seems like they were coming out with a new album every week for a while there in the 80s. And then kaput, they're gone. And all those albums are out of print, and, you're scampering around maybe looking for copies, but no one's picked up to re-release these either. Here's a band called the Dolphins. Malayan Breeze. And I want to say they recorded, there was another album, I think, it might not have had a title at all. I want to say, I think they recorded at least 2 albums. And this was very, very much an electric jazz group, with Dan Brubeck as the drummer. And, it's all electric stuff. Not at all like Dave Brubeck. It took me a while to pick that up. I knew Dan Brubeck was in it. The other musicians, I'm not familiar at all with the other musicians, but it's a quartet with Mike D'Amico on electric guitar, Rob Leon on bass, and I want to say I haven't listened to this real recently, but I'm pretty sure it's electric bass, and Vinnie Martucci on synthesizers, a very electric group. And I was trying to think of, this was recorded in 1990, it came out in 1990 or 91. I'm pretty sure they came out with another album at least. And had DMP lasted, they would have probably continued to. So I don't think the Dolphins is a band that's together anymore. but it is Dan Brubeck nonetheless. What does it sound like? If you like electric late 80s jazz, it's not quite the fusion of the 70s. It's not smooth jazz either. It's got that 80s sheen to it, though. It's all electric, except for the drums. The closest thing I could think of, and maybe this group is too obscure, but is what is it? Elements, the Pat Metheny group offshoot that had the original rhythm section of bass player Mark Egan and drummer Danny Gottlieb from the original Pat Metheny group. When they left Pat Metheny, they went and formed a quartet called Elements. I don't think they record anymore, sadly, either, but initially they recorded a bunch of albums, and they were a quartet with a keyboard player, electric keyboard player, and saxophone player. If you've heard of Elements at all, and they're certainly better known than Dolphins, but if you've heard Elements at all, I would say it's very much in that mode. Very similar. If you like Elements, you'd probably like the Dolphins stuff. So it's hard to say. It's not really fusion. It's certainly not smooth jazz. Not quite like the Pat Metheny group either. But it's probably it's closer to Elements. What can I say? I think is it Cliff Carter on keyboard or saxophone? I can't remember who the other players in Elements were so much. But if I got the chance to pick up their other CD, I certainly would. But I don't think, sadly, the band exists anymore. So I think the thing that really did get my attention initially was that a Brubeck member was in here. But I didn't pick it up for years, and then eventually I did. I might have even got it. I don't know, I paid $14.99 for it at Tower Records. So I don't know. I thought I picked it up on sale, but no, apparently I didn't. So I'm going to do this in a few different parts. It's probably easier for people to watch. It's easier for me to do, and this way I can be lazy and not put up part 2 for another year or two, whatever. So when I do continue, I will do Paul Desmond next, who I got, into, and a lot of people know really from being the guy that wrote Take 5 and from being Dave Brubeck band member for many years during their most commercially successful and popular, well-known time. So that's it for part 1, guys. This is a slightly bit more bite-sized maybe than doing a straight hour and a half, getting everybody in one. And no copyright issues with this one because there's no music playing. So me and my Tiki Lights will see you again very soon, hopefully with additional parts and some more videos. So hope everyone's having a great week, and thanks for watching, guys. Bye.